If you had the option of receiving a great education from a wise and famous philosopher, but your bum was going to be turned into one of these, would you do it? Or would you rather have a bunch of debt, a shitty ideology that ruins the concept of merit, and a degree that doesn't translate well into the workforce? Some studies suggest that the amount of people that go into a career field that actually has to do with their degree can be as little as 20%. I think I'd rather find my own way to educate myself than have my cheeks clapped by some old bastard that wants to talk to me about the beauty of ideas afterwards. Here's an idea. How about you practice some self-restraint? I think we can all figure out if ideas are beautiful without getting our buttholes gauged. No, in our modern times, we get our financial buttholes gauged. If sacrificing my orifices to some famous wise guy was the only way to get an education, I think I'd rather do my way through life until it was time to feed the worms. In this video, I'm going to talk about a subject that you might not know about that took place during Greek and Roman times, and it's probably still happening nowadays. It's called pederasty. It originated or at least became well known in Greece, but chances are this was happening since cavemen realized they could unga almost any bunga if they were powerful enough. Translated, pederast means boy lover, and in these relationships, the boy could be as young as 12 and the man as old as 30. But I'm willing to bet that those parameters weren't the only things getting stretched beyond their socially acceptable limits. Pederasty was referred to as a social, educational, and sexual relationship between an old man mentor and a ripe boy mentee. The influence of pederasty on Greek culture during these periods was so pervasive and entrenched in their society that it was called the principal cultural model for free relationships between citizens. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that is buck wild. I guess Uncle Ben failed to mention that for some weirdos with great power comes weird sexual desire. Even Zeus had his own boy toy origin story. He turned into an eagle and abducted a boy named Ganymede to be his cup bearer. But I'm willing to bet my dog that wasn't the only thing he was bearing. In pederasty, the Erastus was the horny wise man, and the poor cheeky pupil was the eromenos. In English, to help you remember eromenos, because I know you're not going to want to forget, you can say erotic minus, because the pupil is minus the age of consent. And for Erastus, you can change the pronunciation to erased and say the erased likes the taste of young boys. Now try saying that with a lisp. The erased like the taste of young boys. But wait, there's more. The mnemonic devices aren't over. If you're trying to remember these terms in Spanish, eromenos sounds like the words era menos, and that translates to he was less than. And Erastus sounds like the word in Spanish arrastres, which means to drag. And if anyone was dragging something where he shouldn't have been dragging it, it's probably old pervy sensei. All right, let's press on for the sake of knowledge. How many times do you think those poor kids had that said to them? Anyway, in Greece, this relationship tended to be between a socially powerful, educated older person and a socially less powerful, uneducated boy. But in Rome, it was slightly frowned upon because they thought it would corrupt a person's Romanness to do Greek things. So instead, they did the right thing and used slaves and prostitutes instead. Way to use your heads, Romans. Loopholes weren't the only holes being used and abused around those parts. A lot of these men had wives too, but back then they were all seen as NPCs and their only good use was probably to just make more sweet boys. When people engaged in pederasty, the older dude was supposed to mentor his juicy young mark. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know if any of this is true. It could have been a one-way transactional relationship where the poor kid just gets pounded and gets nothing out of it. And if you think I'm being crude, just stop thinking that. I personally believe it's better to joke than to sit here upset or sad. Underage person loving is wrong, immoral, and chances are something terrible happened to you and you're choosing to inflict that trauma on others, as well as whatever wire might be crossed that makes you a control freak or makes you obsessed with corrupting innocence. I'm well aware of most of the nuances when it comes to this stuff. No one should be using their wisdom or power to bring mentally underdeveloped younglings seeking knowledge to their yard. The ability to consent comes from up here, and we know scientifically that the average person's brain doesn't fully develop until they're 25. So I don't want to hear, well, they're pretty mature for their age. I'm sorry, but you sound mature enough to be on a watch list. We just happen to allow sexual relationships lawfully once a person turns 18 here in the US, but that doesn't make it right. According to what I just said, that's still a person whose brain isn't fully formed. And I wish I didn't have to state my opinions on the subject, but in our extremely enlightened society, we've yet to evolve beyond things like this. Just look at the rates of human trafficking and the gone but not forgotten best friend of a lot of our politicians who are still holding positions in office, and YouTubers as well who are engaging in similar behavior. And these are all just examples of people who suck at hiding it and got caught. Can you imagine how many people are still running around trafficking and doing crazy shit? It just hasn't been brought to light yet. All right, it's time to play devil's advocate. And I'm not saying pederasty is right, so don't get your panties in a bunch. All I'm saying is that at least back then they got an actual education and not a shit ton of debt and existential dread. Back then all they had to do was give some existential head. I like to think that this is just one isolated incident and that it was just these intellectuals that held power during Greek and Roman times, but the proof is in the pervert pudding. And this kind of stuff happened also in pre-Meiji Japan, and the boys were like 7 to 17 and they were referred to as the wakashu. In Afghanistan, there's something called bachabazi, which translates to boy play, but it's also referred to as dancing boys, and there's some weird stuff that goes on with that too. In Victorian England, the poet and playwright Oscar Wilde was known to be a lover of boys, and it's suspected that even Shakespeare was too. If any of this upsets you because you think I'm giving philosophers or other famous people that did great works a bad name, you're attached to the person and you need to separate that person's work from who that person is. Because all of this could be a complete lie or it could be completely true. But if I had to bet, I'd say it's probably true. Because we know historically that when people are put in positions of power, they rarely do the right thing with it. And if they do, it's only a matter of time before they sell out. If you get bent out of shape about this subject, I understand. But chances are you're probably someone that's not good at regulating their emotions. And if that's the case, you're going to miss the point of what life's trying to teach you 9 times out of 10. All right, let's get back to the Greeks. So these perverts would guide their eromenos in various aspects of life, including social skills, education, and military training. And as we well know, sex ed, which was a very hands-on class back then, and an oral exam didn't mean what you think it did. So this is all alleged, but there's a lot of historical evidence that supports this, as well as a term that was specifically created to describe this odd relationship: pederasty. I try to do my best to not get negative emotions involved when I'm learning because I want to stay passionate about the things that I discuss. And I am passionate about art history and dark psychology, as well as subjects that our teacher probably had to leave out to continue towing the line and not spark outrage. After all, most teachers had shitty state tests to do good on, or the school district's budget would be on the chopping block. When it's on the chopping block all the time anyway, if I had $1 for every time an education budget was cut, I'd probably have enough to fund an actually decent school. If there's anything I can count on most state governments, or any government for that matter, to do, it's fuck up anything they're involved in. But I get it. It's in their best interest to not teach people how to think. You learn how to think, and suddenly you can see through most of the bullshit that they're peddling. Some people's parents would also probably throw a fit if your teacher was teaching you stuff like this, so I get it. But those are probably the same parents that would allow you to be on a tablet for 10 hours watching someone punch a wad of spam. Going back to the topic at hand, I don't necessarily believe this was every philosopher during Greek and Roman times that engaged in this behavior, because I wasn't there for any of it. And I also don't know if there was a smear campaign at some point from someone who despised philosophers. But I do know that their teachings have done a lot of good for people who didn't have to be power bottoms under their tutelage. I also know there's almost no bounds to the extent of devious behavior we can get into as people if gone unchecked. So I'm thankful that in today's modern times, we don't have to have our buttholes crushed to learn about why it's important to persevere in the face of adversity. Thankfully for us, we don't have to give up our bodies for knowledge. I'm elated to know that we still have access to a lot of the writings of these creeps, which I can honestly say were profound for their time, and a lot of their lessons still apply today. I personally don't think pederasty is right, but that's just me using the knowledge that I've managed to accumulate over 31 years and the culture I've allowed in and the experiences that have made me the man that I am today. And once you realize that a lot of this stuff can be engineered, you start to open your mind and heart to how beautiful and messed up things can become. Whether you believe this all went down or not is up to you. I personally feel the same way about philosophers as I do about any big name actor, actress, musician. They've probably had to do some diddling, or they had to be diddled to get to where they're at, right, Diddy? Might not be true, but at this point too much has come out. I don't take any establishment seriously because nothing is sacred to them anymore. Too many of these entities have been besmirched and we've allowed it to happen. I'm sure you've heard that saying that there's always one person who ruins it for the whole, But there would be less of those little shits running around following through with their fruitless thoughts if we brought back swift punishment. But then again, we leave ourselves open to a human fucking that up as well, so I don't know the answers, folks. I just try to do my best to bring order to the things that I have control over in my life, and that's brought me more peace than any of the other bullshit I used to partake in. And also, no, the answer is not AI, because guess what? Flawed, money-hungry people with biases and shitty ideologies make those too. I've been going off on a lot of tangents, but that's okay. Side quests can teach you a lot about yourself, like, holy shit, am I unfocused? Or maybe I'm just squeezing as much as I can out of life. Regardless, I hope you treat this as an exercise to not always throw the baby out with the bathwater, even though the baby might have turned the bathtub into a honey bucket. I'm gonna let you in a little secret. We're the baby. A lot of us who have sought out the answers to life's greatest questions eventually stumble upon the greatest Greek and Roman philosophers in history. And then later you find out that they were all probably pederasts. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and so on. If you're not familiar with what a philosopher does, they essentially spend a lot of their free time thinking about life's greatest mysteries. Why are we here? Why does my catamite look so delicious? How do I live a full and meaningful life? What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. What makes us who we are? How to deal with adversity, and my personal favorite, where is my super suit? Whether you want to cast judgment or not, simply remember that our desire to judge often overshadows the same desire we should have to learn from those that we judge. And to also take note of the sense of satisfaction we get from judging, because we like to think that could never be us, when in reality it very well could have been you. Did you choose the body you were placed in, the people who raised you, the experiences that made you who you are? Who knows if the incentive of boy bums is what fueled these creeps to seek wisdom? All I know is that there are definitely other means of fueling your desire for the pursuit of knowledge, and my opinions on being attracted to minors is probably even more strict than the laws we have in place. I believe, because of science and what we know about the human brain, that the average time of it developing fully is 25 years. So anyone under that doesn't really have the critical tool necessary for decision making fully formed. Again, these are just my thoughts now. And it wasn't until a couple years ago that I started to do my best to use my brain to think on its own and not be influenced by the conditionally dumb and those trying to push or follow a shitty narrative. I met my wife when I was 27 and she was 22, so I'm really using this video to out myself about how I don't even follow my own rules. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe if you think children should be protected and our corrupt government sucks. Hasta luego.